Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, and welcome to the Booms and Busts podcast. My name is Jonathan Davis. Today is Monday, the 26th of August, 2019. I've been away for the summer. I've got so much to catch up on. I'm going to go right into it. Enormous number of issues in the last month. China has sent in military thugs into Hong Kong, as you all know. And it's interesting how we get to hear about what's going on the other side of the planet, but we don't get to hear what's happening in the country which is next door to us in France. One lovely piece from all that horrendous stuff going on, according to local Hong Kong media reports, Beijing authorities asked the chief executive of Cathay Pacific, Hogg, to hand over a list of employees who had taken part in the recent anti-extradition bill protests. Instead of betraying his employees and endangering their safety, he provided a list of one name, his own, and then he resigned. You should check out what Steve Bannon has been saying on this. Look, if they have another Tiananmen Square, which I talked about a few podcasts ago, I went into some gruesome detail. I reminded you that hundreds of freedom fighters were murdered by the brutal mafia dictatorship in China, the Chinese Communist Party, who otherwise enslave their people in working long hours, no freedoms. If they have another one, it will be the beginning of the end of the Chinese Communist Party. China has a great deal to worry about, or I should say, the Chinese leadership. Hong Kong, Trump, it's not a trade war. You think it's a trade war because they've told you it's a trade war. It's much more than that. It's about bringing civilization and freedom to the wonderful people of China. It's about stopping the raping of the West by corrupt gangsters who pretend to be politicians. Some idiot on Twitter told me yesterday that Trump is failing at the fight, to which I responded, that is your opinion. What did Nixon through to Obama do? I'm not waiting for another response from that idiot. Uyghur women, the Turkish people of northwestern China, have reported being fed medication in their concentration camps to sterilize them. This is beyond chilling. The New Scientist journal reports that 15 academic biological studies have been retracted due to fears, listen to this, that they used Chinese prisoners' organs. The Chinese leadership are actually harvesting live dissidents' organs. The Chinese Communist Party is a murderous regime. The next time you buy something that says made in China, fine, buy it, improve your standard of living, but just remember how it got to you. Government bond yields, which you may or must have heard about over the last few weeks, have absolutely plummeted in the last weeks and months. The US 10-year is down to 1.5%. It was around this level too in 2016 and 2012, the lowest rate in US history. Shall I repeat that? And I'd invite you to go on to my personal Twitter account at Jonathan Davis, where the O is a 0, and see what I put out yesterday about the last 35 years of government bond yields. It looks to me very strongly that over the last 10 years, we've seen a flattening in yields after a multi-decade fall. Think about an enormous saucer from top left to bottom right, then horizontal, and then the question is what happens next. But I will suggest to you, as I have done many, many times, that it's more likely that we're going to see the right hand of that saucer. Imagine mortgage rates at 5%, not 1.5%. Cutting interest rates, printing money. It's all governments and central banks know. They're hell-bent on bringing about inflation. Their stated aim is to raise our costs of living and costs of doing business. Never in history has lower costs been bad sustainably for an economy. They don't care in the slightest about the economy. I will repeat that. They don't care in the slightest about the economy. All they care about is the top 1%, or in fact, the top 0.1%. This is no conspiracy. It is not tinfoil hattism. The facts are abundantly clear. The idiots say we must end capitalism. Why are they idiots? Because it wasn't capitalism that created where we are. It was full-on cronyism, aka socialism. God, we had free marketers in 2008 and 2009 cheering on the bailouts. And now these so-called free marketers decry the vast wealth inequality and something must be done. What was not obvious about the socialism in 2008 and 9, guys? Very few of us indeed said the bailout should not happen. We were and are outsiders. No one listens to outsiders. Practically every single listener, you, to the Booms and Busts podcast, supported the bailouts because you were brainwashed into believing it was the right thing to do. Had you thought more, you would have thought there is no way long term it is going to be good. Between 2010 and 2015, the number of billionaires has gone up by a quarter. The number of those who are worth between 100 million and 1 billion has gone up 61%. If you had 20 million, then you had 100 million. You're one of 64%. It's gone up. Middle class incomes, according to BCG data, down 1.5%. On this month in history, on the 8th of August, we had the iconic photo of the Beatles walking across the zebra crossing on Abbey Road. I drove over it a couple of months ago, driving back from the BBC with Jeremy Vine. There was loads of Japanese schoolgirls taking photos. On the 15th of August 1971, US President Nixon, on the advice of the Fed chair, the Treasury Secretary, severed the link between the dollar and gold, thus reneging on US international gold obligations from the Bretton Woods Agreement 1944. In other words, no longer was the dollar backed by gold, a fiat currency. Of course, it was to pay for the Vietnam War, which had created so much inflation. It had cost so much money, never mind the 50,000 soldiers' lives. And it largely put us where we are today, with enormous debt everywhere. It's all down to Fed advice. Sony has just patented contact lenses which take pictures and videos when you blink. People have no idea what is coming down the pike. Why are you not telling every single person you know about the Booms and Busts podcast? My worst nightmare, I'm going to tell you. My worst nightmare is that Spotify randomly throws out an Ed Sheeran song while I'm driving. I crash and die, but it keeps on playing so that the first responders think I was an Ed Sheeran fan. They tell my wife, and I end up being created to King Shape of You. It's my worst fear. I hear today is the hottest UK late August bank holiday ever. The idiots on the radio have been telling me all day. I've been listening to classical music, Classic FM today, absolutely fantastic. Film themes all day. It's been wonderful. While I've been researching and doing what I do, listening in the background, it's been wonderful. But every hour I've heard this nonsense. Just remember that in summer of 1976, we had temperatures of 39 degrees Celsius in June and July for 18 consecutive days. Don't give me tedious rubbish about climate change. Yesterday, my family, we visited a National Trust venue, George Bernard Shaw's home in Hertfordshire. It's called Shaw's Corner. It's a truly lovely spot. It's well worth a visit. It's not really for kids, but if you want some downtime, it's perfect. Who's George Bernard Shaw, if you don't know? He wrote Pygmalion, I think about 1914, and he then wrote the screenplay for the black and white movie, which I think, yes, it was the 1930s, for which he won an Oscar. And then, of course, it was turned into the blockbuster musical My Fair Lady, Rex Harrison, Audrey Hepburn, Wilfred Hyde-White in the 1950s. Great film, as it happens. Great film. Shaw was a multi-millionaire socialist till the day he died. He couldn't make it up. As lefty and as woke as they come, he married an heiress who was also a socialist. An heiress who was a socialist. And no doubt they had such lovely time with their socialist friends. In their dining room of their home, Shaw's Corner, there are photos of Lenin, Stalin, and the guy who was the head of the KGB. Apparently they were all mates of George Bernard Shaw. And the National Trust, the charity that owns this property, sees absolutely no problem with this. They were mass murderers and mass torturers. I said to the volunteer guide, so he was a multimillionaire and a socialist. You couldn't make it up. He just looked at me as if I'd stuck a dagger into the heart of his hero worship. The Wall Street Journal tells us that California, which of course is uber socialist, California's school curriculum will now describe capitalism as a form of power and oppression, alongside patriarchy, racism, white supremacy, and ableism. Capitalism and capitalists appear as villains throughout the paper. This is what socialists do. They lie through their teeth. They are, of course, brainwashing even younger children. It was the college students, now it's the 11 to 18-year-olds. Google, which of course is Californian, is now conclusively shown that it manipulated search in 2016 and Experts have calculated that they moved between 2 and 10 million votes to Hillary Clinton. Google's parent company, Alphabet, was the biggest corporate donor to Clinton. Zach Voorhees, who was a senior guy at Google, you'll find him at Perpetual Maniac, has given evidence with actual Google documents that Google actively bans and downgrades any site with which Google disagrees. This is not unlawful. Any organization that does this and tells the people of the world and Congress that they don't is breaking many laws. Congress is coming after them. Google is banned for ordinary Chinese. Google actually works for the Chinese state. This is the Google that apparently is your friend. If you want to do something yourself, go to your computer, find DuckDuckGo, and make that your default search. Go to your mobile devices, and if it's an Android device, of course you cannot delete Google because Google created Android. But if it's Apple, get rid of Google, get rid of Google search, and instead download the DuckDuckGo app on your Android device. Download the DuckDuckGo app, and whereas Google no doubt will be at the top of your home screen, put DuckDuckGo into your favorites at the bottom of your home screen. It'll only be a few days. When you go to search something, you will get into the habit of looking down to make a search rather than looking up. Stop using Google. Hit them in the pocket. A number of users hits them in the pocket. That's how you get Google to change. YouTube, which is owned by Google, restricts over 240 Prager University videos. Tomorrow, the 27th of August, PragerU has a court date in their lawsuit against Google and YouTube. Good luck, Prager people. Now, I have to mention Jeffrey Epstein, because you may have noticed no one else is mentioning him already. His murder, which they have concluded is a suicide, which is almost impossible, is the biggest story this century. He hanged himself despite being on 24/7 suicide watch. All objects that could be used to commit suicide were removed, as well as constant CCTV surveillance with all lights on 24/7. Do you realize how much physical strength you'd need to accomplish the following? The medical examiner ruled that Epstein's death was a suicide. He apparently tied a bedsheet to the top of a set of bunk beds. He then knelt towards the floor and pushed himself forward with enough force that he broke several bones in his neck. Do you appreciate how much mental strength you need to overcome the automatic muscle tension if you try this? If he had been shot, they'd have said he threw the bullets fast enough and then jumped in front of them. It should be the first and biggest story every day for a year. It's already all but forgotten. Thus, it's a total conspiracy against the people and protecting the 0.1% as usual. Did you see Prince Andrew's open letter about Epstein? Lock them all up for a very long time. Robert Maxwell's daughter, Ghislaine, of whom Bob's yacht was named, allegedly was Epstein's primary recruitment person of underage girls. Yet hardly a word about Ghislaine Maxwell. And hardly a word now even about Jeffrey Epstein. Listener, if you are not worried for your children's future, you are not thinking straight. Look on the web, contact me, I'll send you a link. Person after person after person in senior roles who had something on the Clintons, dead. I mean, come on. I am encouraged that Bill Barr, the Attorney General, has fired the prison warden, in other words, in UK terms, the governor of the prison, and he has ordered a full investigation. It seems to me that Trump, Barr, Cruz, Congress are actually doing something about bad stuff. Well, we'll see. And Brexit. We have to be encouraged. Dominic Cummings was arguably the greatest person to be appointed to his position. Well, we'll see what happens. We will Brexit, no question. But they still haven't made it clear. Will it be Brexit or Brino? #on verra. We do have the repeal of the 1972 Act, so a great indication. I will add, though, even Brexit would only be that. Even if it's full-on Brexit. It doesn't stop our socialist politicians doing their things. Expect a huge ramp-up in debt and government spending, which they'll call investment. You know, the day Boris became Prime Minister, this is no joke, July the 24th, was the feast day of St. Boris. On July the 25th, the government enlisted the help of Qari, that's Qari, Asim, MBE, a senior imam at Leeds Makkah Mosque and deputy chair of the cross-government group tackling anti-Muslim hatred. He is an imam brought in to battle Islamophobia. It's funny, there isn't any. He is to come up with an effective definition to strengthen efforts against anti-Muslim hatred. Blasphemy laws are on their way. You listen to the UK media and politicians, you'd think most hate crime was against Muslims. Here are government stats for 2016-17. Anti-Muslim, 2,965. Anti-Jewish, 672. But there's 10 times more Muslims than there are Jews. You're twice as likely to be the victim of an anti-Jewish crime, hate crime, than a Muslim. On the 13th of August, video came out showing overnight of over 100 car tires slashed in an Orthodox Jewish community in New Jersey. Media yammers are compulsively about Islamophobia. But in reality, the majority of religion-based hate crimes target Jews. Anti-Semites are emboldened by the newly elected radicals of the Democrat Party. You know who I'm talking about. And, of course, the Jeremy Corbyn Party. Let me tell you this as well. The Palestinian Authority used 51% of foreign aid in 2017 to pay the families of terrorists against Israel. On August the 15th, 2004, Israel started pulling out of the Gaza Strip. Bet you didn't know that. Around the world, they told us by taking down the settlements and withdrawing to the 1967 line, there will be peace. Instead, the attacks became more vociferous and frequent. Give terrorists an inch. I remind you, if the Muslim Arabs gave up weapons, there would be peace. If Israel did it, there would be no Israel. Deputy Leader Councillor Richard Ferris and Shadow Cabinet Member for the University of Peterborough, in Peterborough, councillors for the Labour Party, I meant to say Councillor Matthew Mahabadi. They were pressured into keeping quiet over what they allege is anti-Semitism in the Peterborough Labour Party. The online backlash against them made them fear for their family's safety, so they've resigned from the Labour Party. On the 15th of August, Israel decided to bar Congresswomen Rashida Tlaib and Ilan from entering Israel due to suspected provocations and promotion of BDS, which is the boycotting of Israel organization, in other words, anti-Semites. Why would you want someone to enter your country who hates you and wants you destroyed? Oh yeah, in Europe and the UK we do it all the time with Islamists. Just before I went away, since my last podcast on the 28th of July, the UK government has been quietly preparing a secret police force to pursue right-wing extremism. Peter Hitchens told us on the Mail on Sunday. You may find you are a target. On the 7th of August, South African Parliament got one step closer to passing constitutional reform that white farmers' land will be expropriated without compensation. On August the 12th, Peter John Dalglish, former United Nations chief and top UN founder of UNICEF, the world's largest children's charity, was arrested in Nepal on charges of child rape. During his arrest, 2 children aged 12 and 14 were rescued from his custody. They're laughing, folks. They're laughing at you and me. In 1944, 25th of August, Paris was liberated by the Allies after an over 1,500-day Nazi occupation. The following year, in August the 15th, 1945, people took to the streets in the US and the UK to celebrate the end of World War II, VJ Day. August the 16th marked 200 years since the Peterloo Massacre, when many working class people were killed or injured for the crime of demanding a political voice. Today, on the left, they're paying tribute to them. The socialists are. The following day, they're going back to try and overturn the 2016 referendum result. August the 23rd, 1939. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union entered into the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. They carved out Europe and its borders, and 11 days later, the UK went to war to save civilization from socialism. We read on August the 16th that the Saudis denied an American woman custody of her daughter, saying that she's too Western, She's American. CNN reported that and said, oh, isn't it terrible? Oh, it's terrible. The wonderful Yasmin Mohammed then wrote about it. She said, this story is so devastatingly common. It's even got a title, this issue. It's called Not My Mohammed. Every Western woman who goes to the Middle East and is blinded by the luxury, the wealth, the fast cars, the palaces, the gold, the gifts, and who gets married there to a Muslim, she insists she will never end up a statistic. My Muhammad will never do that to me. And as Yasmin says, yes, he will. In India, in Kashmir, forever, children of cleaners could only do sanitation jobs even if highly educated. The good and correct thinking Prime Minister Modi has removed that evil policy from pure feudalism. Yay, Modi. Talking about Kashmiris, from out of context but also in context, from March the 27th, 2017, this is Rotherham MP Dennis McShane. I was always worried in Rotherham by the extent of patriarchal attitudes in the Muslim community. Go to a public meeting for British Kashmiri citizens and the women sit on one side and the men on the other. Some Muslim girls at a local comprehensive formed an Asian dance group. When the school laid on an evening of folk and other dancing and listed the Muslim girls on the bill, a leaflet was circulated saying they should all be killed for the crime of appearing on the same stage as white girls and exposing a tiny part of their legs and bodies in their dance routines. Editor's note, killed, listener, killed. My Labour friends and I knew, or at least had good suspicions, about who was behind the death threat. He later became a pillar of the Rotherham Muslim community, but we chose to say nout. Just before the Parliamentary Committee decided to accept without challenge or amendment the lurid language John Lyon CB used to end my parliamentary career, I had an unpleasant row with the committee chairman, my fellow Rotherham MP Kevin Barron. We were together in a committee room in Rotherham Town Hall with leaders of the council. Barron was aggressively denouncing in front of the local municipal grandees the reporting of the prize-winning Times journalist Andrew Norfolk. Norfolk had exposed in the Times the cover-up by the South Yorkshire Police and Rotherham Council of the extent of grooming of young girls by local Asian men. Asian? Were they Chinese, Dennis? Taxi drivers and others befriended vulnerable girls barely into secondary school age and showered them with presents, rides and promises of love. Many of these children were in care or from dysfunctional families. Barron objected to Andrew Norfolk's reporting in the Times, which painted Rotherham in a black light. I blew up. For heaven's sake, he's a reporter. He reported what happened. We should be asking how it happened under our noses, not blaming the reporter. Mr. McShane, I want to ask you, why was it only in 2017 that you started asking these questions? Barron glared at me angrily. We never spoke again, and a few days later he sentenced me to political death. Good! I feel ashamed. Oh, do you? You feel ashamed. Is that right? Well, tell that to the 1,400 10 to 14-year-olds who were raped, often tortured and abused You felt ashamed. I felt ashamed that I too, like so many MPs, preferred to keep silent on some of the dirty secrets about bad practices in the Kashmiri Muslim community. The suffocating blanket of political omerta was thrown over a grave scandal. Yes, which you did. Many communities of incomers into Britain provide vast reservoirs of votes, which MPs ignore at their peril. In their day, this was true of constituencies of Irish or Jews. But the Irish or Jews didn't rape and abuse and torture little girls. Just as today MPs look to Muslim voters from the subcontinent. How dare you compare those animals to the decent Jews and Irish of 100 years ago? How dare you? One of my House of Commons heroines was Anne Cryer, the MP for Keighley, a little further north in the West Riding. Time and again in the Commons or in the media, I didn't hear it in the media, she would denounce the scandal of forced arranged marriages. Forced arranged marriages? What's that got to do with paedophiliac abuse that reduced many women to chattel status or obliged a British-born and educated youngster to accept as his bride a girl from a peasant community with no English, no chance of integration as she became a slave to her in-laws? Dennis McShane there pretending that he did pretty well what he could. Rot in hell, Dennis McShane! And there's been lots of lawsuits against various Yorkshire councils and the South Yorkshire Police. You will be even more disgusted to hear that South Yorkshire Police has spent £1.5 million on legal fees. Rotherham Council has spent so far £1.4 million on legal fees. Who's paying the legal costs? We are. The policemen and women? No. The councillors? No. The hospital workers? No. The social workers? No. The general taxpayers. And those evil people in the north of England tried to stop a decent couple who were members of the UK Independence Party from adopting, and they alleged that they were racist. One question: where are the prosecutions of those who not only failed in their duties as public servants, but actively acted against the girls' pleas? Where are even the sackings? Last week we got the head of Channel 4 News saying we're all too stupid to understand anything, so the news will tell us everything we should know. How on earth is that different to what's been going on in the mainstream media stretching back to ancient Greece? There's a story by Jay Beecher that UKIP are going bankrupt right now. Check his Twitter account. And the NEC person that's his source is totally open. We know who she is. She has loads of evidence. Well, again, we'll see over the next few or several months, I guess. This person has been ousted from the NEC and I imagine from UKIP. Question is, why? Was it for good or bad reasons? We know the National Executive Committee are acting so much to make UKIP a centrist party. Big mistake. Huge. As Julia Roberts said in Prostitute Woman. They stopped the last leader, Gerard Batten, a really good guy, though useless on economics, from standing to be leader again. Now they've stopped Batten from becoming the new leader, Richard Brain's deputy leader. And a lady that Brain has chosen, Liz Phillips, to be his chairman I find it outrageous and massively disloyal to the leader and to those who voted for him. 54% out of 4 candidates is a huge win. Brain, I gotta tell you, follow him on Twitter. Whether you're a Kipper or not, he appears a good guy. I've listened to him quite a lot, and you know there is no one more skeptical or I got a gut for these things, but he has a je ne sais quoi. Most of his positions are good, which is saying something. I'm not yet convinced on his free market credentials. Everyone says that UKIP is a free market party. Well, I can tell you categorically it is not. Anyone who wants to argue with me on that is welcome to do so on Twitter, openly and publicly. And I've noticed that Brain has moved on Tommy from the hustings statements to post the election. He was very positive before. He's only slightly positive now. Okay, moving on. Edinburgh Fringe great jokes of the last 10 years. Here's the best 3 that I could find. I took a personal decision last week. I decided to sell my old Hoover. Well, it was just collecting dust. Working at the job centre has to be a tense job, knowing that if you get fired, you have to come in the next day. You know who really gives kids a bad name? Posh and Becks. The University of Michigan, which of course is a socialist state, employs 80 people in its diversity department. An $11 million payroll that would cover the tuition for 700 students. A third of that staff are on 6 figures. Okay, so that's a catch up on what's been going on and on this month in history. Thank you once again for listening and downloading the Booms and Busts podcast. Please let me remind you, if you're a new listener, the easiest way to get this podcast in the future is go to audioboom.com, click on listen, search for Booms and there it will be. Click on it, click subscribe, and then it will be sent to you every time I produce a new podcast. Listen to the podcast when you're commuting, when you're going on at least an hour-long trip in the car, with headphones in the train. You don't have to stop what you're doing to listen. You can do it while you're doing something else. I might suggest to you, it's a pretty good use of your time. We talk politics from a free market, libertarian, capitalist point of view. And I also talk about economics and markets, and I am as objective as I possibly can be. You get people out there selling newsletters and they need bums on seats and all this nonsense, so they go for the usual flavour of the month. I do not do that. On the contrary, I am often out of the mainstream in my thinking. I've been bullish stocks for the last 3 years, and it's been right to be so. Now, okay, it's true that the major indices are broadly flat for a year and a half. As far as I can see, all that is a natural consolidation after 2016 and 2017, which were absolutely humongous. Emerging markets, or at least the fund that we invest in, doubled in those 2 years. Nothing goes in a straight line. So, if I'm bullish and everything else you're reading or hearing is bearish, you want to look at the reality that 90% of the time stocks go up in history. That's a fact. Also, it's a fact that the market will fall 5 to 10% 2 or 3 times a year. And indeed, in the S&P, we're in the second pullback so far this year. But I might suggest to you that coming to the end of August, everyone's coming back to their desks. I think we've had the July and August pullback. I think it's done. Yeah. Okay. So economics, we now have apparently centre-right leaders in the US, in Australia, and the UK. It's a very good start, that's for sure. Quick look at the National Health Service. How much of the NHS budget do you think it is for 2018-19? £129 billion. Total government spending, I can't remember exactly, but it's about 750 to 800 billion pounds. That's the proportion. 130 out of say 770. It's huge. Do you know how many people work in the NHS to look after 65 million people? 1.5 million. The funds will never be enough. They'll always ask for more. Eric Green, he wrote on Twitter, I worked in the NHS and I saw firsthand the wastage. I've seen an invoice to put a bell push on an exterior loading door. The wire, the bell and the fitting. It should have been £5 of materials plus labour. It was £1,200 and it went on for the years that I was there. UK house prices, there's a wonderful chart here. In June 18, only London was down 0 to 5%. December 18, London and the home counties down 0 to 5%. June 19, London, the home counties, and much of the counties surrounding the home counties down 0 to 5%. Annual change in house prices. It's spreading out, folks. The house price falls nationally are spreading out. I've got a wonderful chart from the Nationwide Building Society, which shows real house prices, in other words, house prices against inflation, and real house prices peaked in the summer of 2007. They fell all the way to early 2013. They rose again up to 2016, and they've been falling. This is national. England and Wales house prices have been falling in real terms since 2007. The number of approved UK home mortgages with a term of more than 40 years went up in 2018 from 162 to 3,500. People are absolute idiots. 40 years they're going to have these debts. Absolute idiots. So, you hear about recession. Well, that's funny. Look at the US. Retail sales in July up 0.7%. Manufacturers index up 4.8. Non-farm production 2.3. The Fed index, look it up, the Philadelphia Fed index up 16.8. Trucking tonnage up 7%. Recession, do me a favour. Inverted yield curve, my foot. What's the inverted yield curve? It's where longer term borrowing rates are higher than shorter term. An inverted yield curve is where longer term borrowing rates are lower than short term rates. You will have read and heard till it was coming out of your ears that the yield curve is inverted. What you've heard about is the 10-year rate got lower than the 3-month rate. I got news for you, listener. The 10-year and 3-month tells us nothing about the economy or markets. What you want are the 10-year rate in relation to the 2-year rate. And apart from a few hours, it hasn't yet inverted on a closing basis. And by the way, stop listening to the bears who are getting you to buy their subscriptions or follow them on Twitter for their own egos. They're not helping you and they're not making you money. Even when we will get an inverted yield curve at some point in the future, I don't know when, historically it's 12 to 18 months before the stock market peaks. Interest rates globally are on 120-year lows. In the EU, in Sweden, in Japan, in Switzerland, you've got negative base rates. It's so ridiculous. In Denmark, there is a bank lending a mortgage on a negative interest rate. Yes, really, you don't pay any interest, and every year your mortgage goes down. You couldn't make it up. Last week, 1,000 PhD economists attended the Jackson Hole conference. They got together to avoid reality. At the conference, the uber-elite globalist Mark Carney called for an end to the dollar's reserve status, creation of a new benchmark currency under the IMF. Let me remind you, if the elite want it, it will happen. Expect the dollar to die. Markets. In the US, energy company shares relative to the S&P are at 1980s and 1990s lows. They are stupid cheap. One day, they will come back for years and with a vengeance. Have you bought gold miners, and especially juniors? Juniors are up 50% since May, and years of it is still to come. Gold will likely retest the dollar all-time high over the next 12 to 18 months. It's currently $15.50 an ounce. The all-time high was $19.20 in 2011. Gold's already at new all-time highs in practically every currency in the world. Miners will do incredibly well for years. I'm expecting $2,500 gold within 5 years. The effect on miners will be unbelievable. Listener, listen very carefully. Seriously, listen very carefully. It is the biggest bull market in history. It will continue for years. It's up to you. We are heavily invested in it. We're expecting our portfolios to rise 20% plus this year after costs. And I see no reason at this point in time that next year shouldn't be a very good year also. Have you subscribed to the Booms and Busts report? I send it out every 2 months. If you don't get it, you're missing out. It has really important information about financial markets. It's an informative write-up of special investing opportunities. I've talked about gold on there. I've talked about interest rates and inflation. I've talked about uranium. I've talked about stock markets. And I've talked about investing and economics and so on. For a long-term investor, for your retirement, it is essential reading. Quotes, etc. of the week. How to tell if you're an adult. You gain 30 pounds overnight. You'd rather sleep than go out. Everything hurts. Comfort comes before style. And this is the kicker. You have a favourite spatula in the kitchen. University students look like 12-year-olds. And of course, you're always as annoyed as From a historical perspective, democracy is a relatively new phenomenon. For most of humanity's recorded history, people have lived under some form of autocracy. And who can we credit with the rise of democracy? Not who, but what? Free markets. Remember, the people who hid Anne Frank were breaking the law. The people who killed her were following it. Do we need the state? Do we need the government? In the year 1910, 10,000 Iowa farmers got together and built a road across the entire state in one day. And from Aldous Huxley, whose Brave New World is getting closer and closer, with people talking about the introduction of universal basic income, he wrote, "Facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored." And getting back to those people who you think of as gurus in markets and economics, listen to the great Peter F. Drucker. I have been saying for many years that we are using the word guru only because charlatan is too long to fit into a headline. And on that note, listener, thank you once again for listening. I'll see you again next time. Bye.